Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
We are back here empowering gender opportunities with Doris Sumner. That's right. Over the last 4 episodes, we've got to talk about your business mission to combat the sexism that many of us tolerate. And we, of course, talked about your awesome newly published memoir. And last week, even discussed your cover art. And of course, the feedback you've been receiving has been amazing. So, what are we going to talk about today? This is actually our final episode.
Yes, that's been very exciting to talk about the book, because I think that, again, if you don't understand what a business mission, if you don't understand the need or the impact that it can have on your business, you're really not going to hire it. So I think that my book really solidifies why a diversity consulting company focused on gender bias is really important. My book, it's titled Life at Camp: Combating the Sexism We Tolerate and Why the Military Should Take the Lead. And it's not just a story of my experience, but my experience, the details of trying to present to a very male-centric leadership that if they embrace feminism, it would be a whole lot better. And it was definitely a challenging job, attempting to change a culture where there's this high degree of sexual harassment and sexual assault, and we want to change that culture. So it's like, how do you change the culture? I just kind of wanted to mention that some of the young, strong, professional women have been saying, what do you mean tolerate sexism? I don't tolerate sexism. I don't put up with that. So I wanted to explain a little bit more about what I mean by tolerating sexism, because it can sneak up on us and be sort of tricky. And I spent 33 years specifically driving through the camps of Camp Johnson, and that's why I titled the book Life at Camp. It certainly was a big chunk of my life, although I hope I have another 33 years chunk here on the planet.
Yeah. Well, thank you. We're excited that you are here, and you'll be around for much longer. So what would you say in all this? Of course, why do you say that we tolerate sexism? You know, I certainly think I like to think that I don't tolerate it, but if someone is being sexist toward me, I plan to kind of push back very sternly.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was saying. These young women are saying, I don't tolerate it. You know, I give them hell. But, and that's what I recommend. Yes, you definitely push back. But there are some times when it's not safe to push back, or it's not advantageous to our career to push back. We know about retaliation. And often, first, we have to recognize what it looks like and how it shows up. So that's why I use the term tolerate, because I tolerated it for so many years. I was not an equal opportunity officer until I was 40 years old. I had already spent 22 years in the military. And as I'm learning about preventing sexual harassment and discrimination, I'm realizing that I have acclimated into a culture where I've tolerated a lot of sexism.
Got it.
Yeah. So I'd like to give an example of how that shows up. And of course, I write many examples in my book. So like I said, I want to be clear that sometimes, you know, every situation is different, and sometimes it's just not safe to give pushback. But the point is that when we recognize it and we know it's unacceptable, that we make an intentional pushback. So it may not be in the moment. We might not turn around and say something right then, but we do something intentionally to reject it. I got a quote here from Leonardo da Vinci that says, nothing strengthens authority as much as silence. So if we don't say anything, we're saying it's okay. So here's an excerpt from my book, and this comes when we were meeting with a command sergeant major, a very high-ranking person that's in charge of 70% of the force is enlisted people. These are the sergeants and the specialists and the privates. Okay, so this is a command sergeant major who's in charge of the state enlisted. There are hundreds of stories that I could tell where I've tried to tell men in senior military positions in my attempt to help them understand the cultural barriers that women have. So one female in this meeting that we were having, she didn't speak up and tell an example that she had given. So after the meeting, I I wanted to tell the sergeant major this example, thinking maybe I could get through to him. This is what she had, the way that she read it.
Sure.
I had a terrible headache at drill, so I went up to the first sergeant and I asked if he had an aspirin. He said, no, but I can run you to the store. She said, sure. We were walking across the armory and a bunch of guys were standing around. The first sergeant yells over to them, y'all don't talk about us while we're gone, okay? They all laughed, but it mortified me. This was a combat arms cavalry unit. I was one of 2 women in the unit, and I was trying to earn respect. I was seeking to get a full-time job in the unit. This one comment erased what I had worked so hard to build. After reading her story, I further explained to the sergeant major that even if they hired her for the full-time position, many of those guys might perceive it as a quid pro quo sort of deal, although women did not need a scene like this for guys to think that. When she told me the story, I heard her pain. I heard her humiliation, her disgust and irritation. When I told this sergeant major, that the leader of all enlisted, he chuckled and said, I probably said dumb shit like that before. He admitted to seeing the problem, but he was quick to add, she should have spoken up and called him an asshole. Well, I shook my head. What kind of recommendation is that? I kept on talking, explaining that she wanted to get a job. And the first sergeant was a selecting official, so she couldn't make a fool out of him in front of his troops. All she could do was put it in her imaginary backpack, compounding her headache. I told him so many women don't even recognize this as sexism, but it is. And it deters inclusion and objectifies females. The first sergeant in this story, he took away her power. He made her out to be something that he'd go and have fun with just so his boys could laugh. And to him, it was just a joke. It was just him being funny. But it was another humiliation for her. So I told the sergeant major that women do get tired of constantly combating sexism along with competing with the men. You have to be competent. So I must have felt like I was getting through to him as I continued to make my case. This is why we had the women's workshop. This is why we need a women's group. We need these forums. We need women to understand where their energy is being taken from. And he said, well, if they don't know it, why would we want to tell them? I would continue to engage with command sergeant majors for the next 5 years of my career, and every conversation was hard and felt senseless. I would often vent that I'd rather stick a fork in my eye than explain gender bias to another man.
Wow. This sounds like a moment in your career where you really were just banging your head against the wall. Oh my gosh. Well, certainly some tough conversations. I love hearing this and the honesty and the truth of what has happened. And what options did the female, you think, have in that scenario? She certainly wasn't happy, but what could she do?
Yeah, well, certainly calling him an asshole is probably not going to be the wise thing to do. But a lot of women do banter back and forth and use sarcasm and humor.
Yeah.
Most of the time, they're just shrugging it off, and saying asshole silently, like whatever, they're just joking, and they don't recognize that that's what's happening. So I do advise women to find a safe way to enlighten leaders on how these seemingly casual comments impede equality. Now, would the first sergeant have said that if he's walking out the door with a guy? It's easy for me to suggest that a young woman warrior go tell somebody in leadership, especially now that I'm 60, I'm out of the military, I have no fear of reprisal. But a young woman who's trying to gain rank and respect and, getting a job, it's definitely more of a risk to do that. So what I'm suggesting is that she find a safe person to talk to and get encouragement on how to raise that issue.
Mm-hmm.
Also there's other ways that you can lift that voice. Maybe company surveys where they have surveys and you can anonymously say. So when leaders are reading those surveys and they're seeing these comments from the soldiers in the unit, they're like, hey, we need to cut this out. We need to be more aware of what's coming out of our mouth. So there are ways to speak up to say it's not okay.
Interesting. Wow, this is powerful. Let's talk. There's some more, disrespect, right? You say a lot of
Yeah.
people are thinking about this and this unconscious bias that comes out in comments where, sometimes we truly don't mean harm, but it does harm, right? Ah,
Right. Right. Actually, the sergeant major in the story provided our diversity team with an example of a sexist remark that he was saying around the units. He used to go, soldiers swear, everybody swears. Well, he used to, when he would swear, when he was in a room, if there was a female in the room, he would look to the female and he'd say, "Oh, I'm sorry," and he would apologize. Well,
hmm.
this female master sergeant, one day she said to him, "Sergeant Major, if you're gonna apologize for swearing, apologize to everybody. Swears aren't gonna burn my ears off. Like, apologize to everybody." And he was kind of surprised, but he said, "That's the way I was raised, to say that we're not supposed to swear around women." But it did make him realize that he was pointing to the women and saying, "I'm sorry for swearing." And
Yeah.
he changed his behavior, probably just swore and didn't apologize at all, but he did realize that he was unconsciously, doing that. It was a sexist thing, saying that women can't hear swears, but men can. And so that's the disparate treatment. And there was a time where Playboy magazines and Playboy calendars were in the work centers. And today I'm certain that male employees would know that that is definitely not okay, because there came a time where people in the workforce were saying, I'm uncomfortable with that. I'm not okay with that. I don't want that around here. And, so it became policy that we're not going to have those things. So the only way we know to change is when somebody, raises that awareness that it's offensive. I don't like it.
Yeah.
And again, sometimes it's not safe to do it,
But
but we have to find a way to say it's not okay. Yeah.
wow.
The other thing is, sometimes women aren't offended. They think it's funny, or they're bantering, they're playing right along with it, and they don't think it's offended. But again, as I said earlier, if you don't understand the spectrum of harm, sex-based harm begins somewhere, and it generally begins with this attitude, and we test that through words and comments. We see if we can get away with saying, "Hey, honey, I like the way you're looking there," and we see if she's going to tolerate that and banter back, right? So there's someone who would absolutely shut that person down, right? Or a supervisor.
Wow. No, it really
So
is. Oh my goodness. Wow. All right. Well, this is a great show already, as always. Let's remind everyone how we can reach out to you. Tell us about the book. Tell us where we can contact you.
yes, it's allaboutego.com is my website, and I have the prologue on there, and generally
Yep.
what the book is about, and also previews, reviews of people that have read the book. And the book is available on Amazon, or you can order through local bookstores. And also my business, Empowering Gender Opportunities, I kind of spell out there some of the services that I provide as a diversity consultant, for catering to the size of your business, the number of employees, the type of work that you do. So it's all there at it'sallaboutego.com.
All right. Perfect. Thank you so much. Stay tuned, everyone. We'll be right back after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Have you ever rolled your eyes or screamed on the inside when a coworker or boss called you honey or sweetie? They mean no harm, right? Perhaps you don't want to be known as the employee who nags about being politically correct. Hi, I'm Doris Sumner, president of Empowering Gender Opportunities, EGO, a diversity consulting company focusing on the gender bias impeding team effectiveness. Are you a fearless leader willing to help your employees? Check out Ego at www.it'sallaboutego.com, and let's build synergy.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Welcome back to the show. We are back here with Doris Sumner and having a deep conversation really about how sexism shows up in the workplace, everywhere, really. And many of us just kind of tolerate it by shrugging it all off. So she discusses her recommendations and strategies to reject sexism. And of course, what else can we do to help your mission of combating sexism here today, Doris?
Oh, well, thank you. And again, I think a lot of us don't recognize it as sexism. Like I said, it comes in the forms of jokes or sarcasm or just bantering back and forth, and we do not see the harm that what it's setting the continuum up for. So rejecting it early and saying, I don't like that, that's unacceptable, or finding a way to have the leadership of your section, your unit, your organization say, we cannot tolerate this. During my tenure in the National Guard, I spoke at the highest levels. I gave presentations about sexism and combating sexism and just trying to disrupt that harm by early interventions and changing the culture. Sadly, 1 in 4 women will experience sexual assault during their enlistment. And the military's separate justice system, which is overseen by commanders, has been criticized on this low rate of conviction. So the cost of each survivor is immeasurable. The numbers across the military branches point to the problem getting worse, not better. And sexual assault rates are up.
Mm-hmm.
The percentage of people reporting sexual assault is down, and trust in the military when it comes to protecting victims is at an all-time low. So that is a sad state of affairs when I talk about military organization, the most esteemed organization in our country, still having this problem. So the military must take the lead, because if we don't do anything, nothing's really going to change or impact the culture. Now, I know I am not okay with another 34 years of this going around. I talked about last time my sister working in the logistical distribution company for 34 years saying there's still sexism. There's more representation, but there's still sexism. And I'm not okay with 1 in 4 women in the military experiencing a life-changing traumatic incident that they have to carry and heal from. So that's why I have this sense of urgency to do something about it. So it's not, it's not something that we can just shrug off, is what I'm saying. So that's why I'm trying to raise so much awareness on it.
Oh my goodness. So what are some of the proposals you write about the military needs to do? It seems there's a lot of attention on this issue. Can you help us understand a little bit why this continues to be such a problem for the military?
Yeah, I think that a lot of the focus has been on the care for survivors, which I applaud and support. Obviously, if something traumatic, sexual assault or sexual harassment happens to you,
Yeah.
it is important that the organization have the advocacy to care for the victims and also for accountability. But what I talk about in my book in great detail is the prevention. So let's stop the damage from happening. So how do we fix it? And so what I propose is changing the culture through gender equality accountability. But you can't really enact a law or a policy unless you convince those that have the power that it is going to make the necessary changes. And I learned through the years of activism that it's really hard to pass a law. It's really hard to pass a policy, even within a organization, because you have to convince those that hold the reins that all this work and effort in implementing this is going to be worth it. During the briefings, the senior leaders, I was trying to promote that if we had more women, we would have less sex-based offenses. But they would always tick off the reason why we don't have women. Obviously, the combat exclusion rule and a lot of the positions in the military are combat, or they would say that women just don't want to join the military. They would point to our Vermont National Guard having the first female adjutant general. But regardless, the problem statement was always the same, that women were underrepresented in all occupations in the Air and Army Guard. And the goal was to increase the numbers. But what I couldn't thoroughly and effectively communicate was why we need more women. It was never fully understood by the all-male senior leaders, the value of gender diversity. So, I say we need more women in the military, not just for recruiting numbers, not just for the sake of readiness, but women in power to influence the command climate. And the military, we can't just appoint somebody to be a general or a sergeant major. We have to grow them, but we can't grow them if they're getting sexually assaulted and they're not feeling included or valued, and they're getting out at 3 times the rate of the men. Now, research has shown that firms with, organizations, corporate America, firms with more women in senior positions are more profitable, more socially responsible. They provide a safer and higher quality customer experience, among many other benefits. So there is a ton of research proving that if you have more gender diversity in the command climate, then you're going to have a more profitable business. But the military, our profit is readiness. It is not money. And so because the military gets the job done and we do what we need to do, it's hard to sell that profitability of having more women. So that's why my book, 622 pages, there's a lot to say of how that is the answer to reduce sex-based offenses, is to have more women in this culture.
Wow, absolutely. And I can't believe this. This is actually wow, pretty amazing. You've over the past few weeks learning all about you and your career and what you've done and accomplished. And yeah, now it's not just the military. It's transluted. It's right, ascended, I should say, to so many different fields and people. I remember you were at a local you were selling your book. You had a book signing recently, and you were telling me, right, that lady was very interested. And it's like people who never heard of this or understood it. They're like, wow, this gender equality really does exist, and not just here in the military. It's everyday life, every job, right?
I really enjoyed, I was at the fairgrounds again this weekend and enjoyed some wonderful conversations with such a diverse group of people that come up to the booth. Okay. Because I had young men come up, and again, I have my cover art there, and then we have some other military things there. And my husband, who's a combat vet, he's standing there with me, and we just have great conversations. And there was this young man, 20 years old, and just a cool looking dude. And he was just like, he totally rejects the boxes that
Yep.
society tries to put. Women should do this and men should do that. And he's like, I'm totally all for gender equality. And that was a great conversation. And then another woman who had received my book last month, and she was elderly, and she came up and she gave me a hug, and she said, I didn't think I would really get this book, but I opened it up. And she said, your book was very easy to read, and I was getting it. And she says, I was even late feeding my dog. She says, I was just reading. So that was validating that regardless if you're young or old, in the military, out of the military, I think it's a story that can resonate with people, that there are individual things that we can do to say we reject sexism. We reject these societal roles and stereotypes that often preclude our actions. So like I said, the story of the sergeant major apologizing for swearing to the women, once he was aware of that, he realized that that really was a sexist sort of way to talk to the group, and he changed.
Yeah, well, this is fascinating. Now, have you piqued interest in the military themselves? Just curious.
Yeah.
Have you? Good.
Not yet, but like I said, I spoke in the military, and they are doing these sort of events and these sort of presentations, and so I'm hoping, like I said, that what they end up seeing is the tie between diversity, gender diversity specifically, but all types of diversity, improving our readiness, our profitability. You know what I mean? And seeing that tie to the military doesn't make money. And so
Yeah.
our profit is our readiness. And that's what I'm trying to present here. And the law that I tried to enact here in Vermont, it was a bill called H401. And what it was attempting to do was hold the state adjutant general accountable for the recruitment, retention, and promotion of women within the state guard. And although they do that organically through the service requirements, having, like I said, eyes on it. When we count something, when we measure something, we pay attention to it. There's a lot of people that pay attention to their weight because there's a scale that says it's something, right? So when we count something, we pay attention to it. And that was a bill that we tried to enact, and it never made it out of committee. But what we were trying to highlight here in Vermont, a small state, is that we got to pay attention to the number of women in the pipeline to become those future commanders, those future sergeant majors who influence the culture. And so, again, very much detailed in my book. And that's my mission that I'm working on now. And one day at a time, I just keep at it.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for being here. Remind us how we can contact you, please.
Yeah, my daughter says I don't have to say the www before it.
You don't, but it's okay. How cute. I do the same still. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. It's allaboutego.com is my website. And again, you could go to amazon.com to get the book and look at the reviews. Goodreads.com has some really very nice reviews on there. So you can get a feel for what's in the story. And certainly contact me at doris@it'sallaboutego.com is my email. And I'd love to talk to you, engage with you about how ego can help your business and your team.
Perfect. Thank you so much. You have a fantastic day. And to all of our listeners, stay tuned. More of the shows coming up. Best of luck to you. And I hope, a lot comes from this. I'm sure it will. Thanks again, Doris. Bye-bye.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.